Welcome to Under the Fringe. We are your hosts, Andy Yablonsky and Julie Babin, two interior designers with almost 50 years of combined experience. And while we love design, our passion has really become helping the next generation of designers struggle less, earn more, and create more freedom in their lives. We offer a whole host of support options to help you create the structures you need to really thrive and grow. More to come on that at the end of the show.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming this week. We're so excited to introduce our new episode, which we're titling, We Are Not in the Business of Losing Money.
It's true.
And we really want to hit this point home to you this week. We've talked a ton about contracts and fees and really working with your clients so that they're very happy and enjoying the process with you. But today we're shifting things a little bit and we're moving into, I would say it's a more of a nuts and bolts conversation of really inner workings of your company, the inner workings of your company, the way you're running things, especially from a financial perspective. And then we're going to also go a little bit bigger after that and get you to start thinking about yearly goals and having new targets. So that's what we're talking about today. And we're, of course, very excited because it's a process that Andy and I have come to know and love over the years of our experience. And I would say it's pretty essential what we're going to be talking about. I think you can't go big without it.
Yeah. I think that there is, well, it's not a misconception that this is a luxury business, right? I think that when clients come to us, they understand that we command big fees for doing the work that we do. So that's not the surprise. I think the surprise is when we are talking about, like, let's say we give ourselves an hourly rate of $150 an hour. But if you don't fully understand how far that 150 is going in your own business and your own personal life and your own bottom line, it's pretty meaningless. Because it might not cover what you need it to cover, or you might then have to work way more hours in a week than you actually physically have. So that is the piece. It's as meaningless to a client for you to give them your hourly rate as it is for you just to say, I make $150 an hour. And it seems like a number, but no one works 40 hours a week billable, right? There's plenty of stuff that's non-billable in the business. So I think what we calculated the last time we were together, maybe not the last time we were together, but a previous episode, was roughly half of that. So I think a really great, solid approach as a sole practitioner and someone even moving into heading up a business with other people is that you're shooting for 20 hours of billable time.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do a little math right here on I should have done this previously, but let's just, for funsies, 20 times 150. That's $3,000 a week, $12,000 a month. It's not a terrible goal, right? That's if you kept all that money, but you don't. Right?
Yes.
So then I'm going to times that by 4, 12 grand. And then I'm going to times it by 0.7. You're pulling in 8,400 after taxes. Oh, but wait, you have overhead, right? So what's your overhead just in your business, right? So we've got insurance, we've got, maybe we're paying a drafter, that's billable, but we still have to pay that person a salary. You've maybe got, Julie, what were the things that we,
assistant, of course, on a design front, probably someone separate from that is doing your drawings. We also
$100 a month.
And we also want to budget, as we're budgeting in, like over the course of your year, because this is just maybe one project or something, is a photography budget, because as you're completing these projects, you're going to want to have money sort of allocated to pay the photographer at the least, and then it's also going to be a lot of your time.
And that's if
We
you
also
didn't budget it into the budget like we suggested last time. So if you didn't do that, then you're gonna have to pull that out. So let's say you're just saving $200 a month on marketing.
yeah, it's like you want to start setting these amounts aside. We always find that we have travel expenses. Like if you're going to, you know, Andy and I often have remote projects. So you're going somewhere for the project, so you're traveling. And then also a lot of travel is involved if you're doing research and development to research other properties and see things that are in different parts of the world than you live. So there's definitely a travel line item for travel. And then there's like generic costs, like I gotta get my website. Someone has to like maintain the website. So like as I get more photography and more marketing materials, there's an ongoing cost there. Of course, like initial costs like logos and things
Yeah.
that are in the beginning. But then like again, your ongoing marketing, is someone doing your Instagram for you? Are you working with someone in PR? But some type of marketing budget. And then you have ongoing costs for like software. I need to buy a new computer. I need to maintain my printers. I need to pay my subscriptions for Dropbox and, you know, Microsoft Office, or these subscription based software.
Yep.
And then of course other people that are involved, like a bookkeeper and an accountant.
So
Those
I
are kind of like
whittled
general
down-
ones.
Yep, I whittled down those expenses. So after taxes and your overhead monthly, you're pulling in 5,775, 5,775.
And that's based on a $12,000
Yep,
total, goes
Correct.
down to less than half.
yeah, less than half. So I paid the, let's say the drafts person who works maybe, 15 hours a month. I've paid my insurance, my drafting subscription, my printer toner, blah, 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 right? Like all the things that Julie just rattled off. I was just sort of like calculating out, subtract. And that, so we're getting down to 57.
Yep.
5,775. So that's obviously, that's maybe one project, right? That's 20 hours a week. And then that one project is going to go on for several weeks, but I don't know, again, like you have to do all these other calculations per project, but my reality is I need to make about 15 grand after taxes a month to fund my life.
Yeah.
So, and that includes like saving in my 401 and, all the other, like some of the credit card debt that I've accumulated, that, it's not that much, but I still want to make sure that I'm like right on top of it. And so I've got a mortgage payment, I've got car insurance, I've got a car, I've got food expenses, I have travel expenses, I've got student loans.
There's often things for, of course, like kids and animals. Obviously it all adds up.
I think we all
kinda
have,
quickly.
if we live in the Bay Area, and if you live somewhere else, your expenses might be less, but your available profitability might be less. Like you might not be charging $150 in Kansas. Maybe you are. I don't know. If you are, well done, because your take home is going to be a lot more than what our take home would be. But the point is that if you are not charging enough, then you're going to find yourself in a really big hole. And one of the things that we want to make sure people are doing, so you got to have a budget, got to have an understanding of what your actual costs are in your life. You need to have a budget for your business and understand what those monthly overhead costs are. If you have an office, that's going to be more. But that's also a higher tax deductible item. Like one of the things about the business that's tricky that my accountant explained to me a long time ago is there's not a lot of overhead. So it seems like the perfect business sometimes because we don't have a tremendous amount of outside expenses, but that also means that we can't deduct a lot. And so it's this very like tightrope walk situation where you want to be able to take as many deductions as you can. And that's why, you know, your accountant is going to tell you, have a dedicated home office space. You can pay yourself, you can deduct that amount from your taxes. You want to make sure
Mm-hmm.
you're tracking your mileage if you are traveling, you know, outside of a certain radius. So I think that what we've come across is that most people don't have a great understanding of how much your business actually costs you.
Yeah. And there's the other part of like of time,
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
billable versus non-billable time.
Mhm.
That's another line item on the budget in a way.
Well, that's why the 20 hours was a helpful calculation. Like if you worked more than 20 hours a week,
Yeah.
billable time, you would obviously gross more. But you know, the nice thing about our business is that if you are buying net items and then marking up, you are
Mm-hmm.
creating a second stream of income. So that this is only
Yeah.
your hours, right? It doesn't include your markup. But it probably also doesn't include mistakes that you might end up making. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
when do you find out the mistake is made? After the damn thing is installed.
Mm-hmm.
So frustrating and heartbreaking and so many other things, right? And so
Yeah.
you have to have a contingency for that. That's super important to know that as human beings, we are fallible to mistakes, and sometimes they're expensive. And you know, like you can't catch everything. I won't speak for everybody. I cannot catch everything. It's impossible for me. I work too
Mm-hmm.
fast. I run too quick. You know, there's all kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
I get a lot done, but I also know that in my business, there's probably going to be like one thing, which I mean, what I'll say about the things that I've made mistakes on, I've never made the same mistake twice. Um, so yay, learning. But um but I'm not going to assume I'm not going to make any other mistakes. Although I will say, when I was living in San Francisco, I used to get parking tickets frequently for street cleaning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just decided one day I'm done making forgetting like to set an alarm or whatever. No more parking tickets. And for literally 2 years, I didn't have a single parking ticket because I was so vigilant about that. So is it possible to change your mindset around an idea or an assumption? Absolutely. Is it easier to get an assistant to double check all your work? For me, yes.
Yes.
That's that's how I've started
And
mitigating.
that's such a great way of framing it, because I think many people will think an assistant is, oh, I have to pay this amount to this person. And what we're trying to say is this person will allow you to bill out at their rate, and that profit comes from the project. It doesn't come out of your pocketbook. It comes from the ability to do more projects. You have more hands, more projects, more hands, and that money is coming from the project. It's not coming from like your bank account,
Yeah.
which I think a lot of people sometimes feel that resistance.
Huge point. The people under you should be making you money and not costing you money.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of scaling, is that you are able then to create more revenue.
Yeah.
And of course, that person has a billable rate that's less than yours, but also what you're paying them per hour is less than your billable rate. And I think, I mean, it's so chicken and egg, because if we worked in a design office before and you have a sense of what you're being paid versus what they're billing out, you're like, I should get a raise. I'm sure there's plenty of people that have thought that.
Hmm.
Maybe you are owed a raise. I don't know. I don't know when your last raise was or what you negotiated. But the idea that you should be making your billable rate in someone else's office is not correct. And I think that's
Hmm.
on the employee side. And I'm sure there will be people that are listening who are current employees thinking, yeah, I should be making $150 an hour if that's my billable rate. Well, your boss has overhead like insurance and other things. We didn't even mention health insurance or
Yeah.
those things that come when you have employees, but those are other expenses that obviously you have to deduct. And so that's why those employees have high billing rates, because that needs to cover some of those, but there still should be a profit margin. So these are the things you have to look at: your revenue, and then you have to look at your overhead as a business owner, and then you have to look at your salary and your personal expenses, because those two things have to work in tandem. If you are not making enough money as a business owner, you shouldn't have a business,
Yeah.
because
And
you're
I
just
think what's
putting yourself.
interesting about all of this is like, okay, why are we advocating for these things? Well, unfortunately, sadly, if the business isn't growing, it's shrinking. And so it is a sad reality, but it is a reality. And I think maybe some people might think, oh, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing forever. But you do need to have, like she mentioned, scale or growth or whatever you want to call it. But if you don't have some type of growth and scaling, the business slowly is treading water, and slowly, you're going to drown. Or eventually, that's why businesses go out of business, right? So if you're kind of wondering, like, why are we advocating for this stuff? I don't want to grow in that way. Just think about it. There has to be some growth in the profit center. And a lot of times that comes with having a team.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I recently heard another designer say this, and she was like, you could go out and raise your rates $50 an hour. It's not going to do anything.
Yeah.
Her point behind that was $50 an hour, if you don't have the right project, means jack, right? Like, it doesn't mean anything, because you don't have a sense as a business owner of what you have to bring in. So raise your rate $50 an hour if you're still taking bathrooms only, and there's no furnishings,
Uh-huh.
or there's no, like, maybe you have a 2-room minimum. If you haven't set a minimum and you are taking on small projects, the reality is you probably have to charge $500 an hour in order to get to your actual yearly and monthly goal in order to pay your bills. And so I think it's, a lot of the time we have a startup, and people don't expect startups to make money in the first 3 years. This is a business you could make money in the first 3 days. You just have to know how to structure it correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you've been operating at a break even or even at a loss, this is your opportunity to revise how you're doing business so that you actually can operate at a profit. But you have to know what your true costs are.
Yeah. And I think we should talk about the non-billable time. So when Andy was saying, like, realistically 20 hours billable time per week, I think is very accurate, and is probably on the high side. Like, I can see a lot of weeks, sometimes I'll be at the 10-hour mark for a billable week. And anyways, breaking that down, why is something that we just keep saying this over and over to you guys, is all of this is just about awareness, so that you can know and be aware of the choices that you're making. So you're not getting somewhere by default. Like, we're not saying anything is right or wrong. We want you to have awareness about the mechanics and the way that the way your business operates. But the whole, well, why is it 10 to 20 hours a week of billable only? Well, how much time are you spending doing this other stuff that you have to do on the project? So you're busy, you feel busy, but yet you can't charge for it. And I think that's a really big category to be aware of. Obviously, a lot of it has to do with purchase orders, tracking, maybe training your staff, maybe kind of cleaning up something that went a little sideways on a project with the contract. Maybe the contractors are a little bit tricky to work with, and you have to navigate some situations. There's a lot of reasons why things take longer.
Yeah.
Than you think, and it doesn't directly come from the billable time. And those numbers are really important to have, because that, if you say, oh, I have $200 an hour, well, but when you divide it by these other hours, what does it really come out to be?
Yeah. So I think, if you're able to, again, be really honest about how you're spending your time. And let's say, so in my business, I probably spend about 15 hours a week on billable time and then another 15 on non-billable time. And then I have other
Mhm.
businesses. So I have 10 hours a week that aren't even in my design business. They're like in
Mhm.
my Airbnb business or in my painting business. And now we've got this coaching platform. So some of that time is going to shift over to that as well, which is super exciting. And I mean, if I have to hustle and work more than the 40 hours of prescribed time, I will, or
Mhm.
I'll delegate something to someone else so that they can be working in that business while I'm choosing to put my time other places. But I know that
Yeah.
I don't, I mean, I can't say I don't have a family because that's not true anymore, but um, I have a part-time family. I see my partner and his daughter on the weekends and then sometimes we have like a date night during the week, but most of my time really is my time. And I think that that is maybe true for some of our listeners. I would say a lot of the women that or designers that I know have families and
Mhm. Oh yeah.
that you want
Lots
to
of
be able
kids.
to but that you want to be able to like pick up and drop off and have
Mhm.
conversations in the car and kind of check in with your kids. And so then your workday is really limited to about 6 hours of, I guess if you cut down on the commute time, you're like at 5. So
Mhm.
let's say you're at 5 hours. So that's all your time in your business,
Yeah.
20 hours a week, right? No, 30, sorry. Well, my math is bad today.
Well, in a way, it ends up being like day to day. If you have five
It's really bad,
hours,
25 hours.
it's like half and half. You're like, oh, if I have 5 hours per day,
Yeah.
you could sort of assume half of it's billable and half of it might not be billable.
Yeah.
And so you start to really see that I need to be laser focused because I want to hit everything that's really important in these 2.5 hours of billable time. Or maybe I can cut back on my non billable. And, but you really start to realize you have to be very targeted
Yep.
in how you
Yep.
spend your time.
I mean, I have a client who is a surgeon and she was very upfront, like right away, like Nanny's here all the time. Like we can't live without her. She is how our life.
Yeah.
Um, and for them, that was the only choice that made sense because
Hmm.
they really couldn't figure out how to have children and the careers that they have without help.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and I think, we have been advocating this throughout this process, but whether your help comes in the form of a nanny or preschool or drop off pickup or
Hmm.
assistant, like somewhere in the train, because the track is broken. Like we've been sold the bill of goods that like, oh, you can have it all and you can do it all and you can be it all.
And
I
it's not
have children
realistic.
and I am
Yeah.
having a hard time like falling into this like you can do it all, be it all, have it all category. And I mean I know like I was talking to my friend Heather who's an interior designer and she's like, what, just have a schedule and I have a structure and I just get it done. And like she's a very regimented person
Yeah.
who has a lot of self-discipline. And while I would say I have self-discipline, I also have ADD and it's really hard for me to necessarily like sit down and concentrate in these chunks of time. And
Hmm.
so that is definitely a deficit for me. The attention deficit notwithstanding, like it's not that easy. So in some ways I am willing to like float in between these businesses. But I have time blocked out so that I understand where I
Yeah.
want spending my time. And then if I shift something around, I can rearrange it, but I know like what I need to be working on
Hmm.
and in order to accomplish my goals for the week, the month, and the project. And so, no, I think that having help in some form or another, like I'm just not sure that we should be trying to subscribe to that lie anymore because it's harmful to us. It's harmful to think that
Yeah. You can do anything you want with a small village.
with a small village, it's true.
Mhm.
Because
Someone
I
needs
know
to be
that
there to fold the laundry, maybe something like that, or we have the groceries delivered or whatever.
absolutely. So
Hmm.
and I also, this is actually a really helpful thing. Marie Forleo said this a long time ago. and it was outsource anything that you can. So like grocery delivery is one of those things.
Mhm.
I know, like, I would love to have somebody come in and do my dishes because I don't think paying myself my hourly rate to do dishes is very profitable, but there's no one here. So it's me. But I don't have to go to the grocery store, right? I can get
Yeah.
my groceries delivered. And I think that again, if you're stretched really thin and you're feeling like you don't have enough time, like outsourcing some of these things, like the gig economy has been a really big, I think, influence in how we can spend our time,
Yeah.
and that it is allowing more freedom. Does it cost
Yeah.
a bit more? Sure. But does it cost as much as you at $150, 200, 250? I don't necessarily want to spend $250 on top of my current grocery bill because I didn't get an hour of billable time as I chose to go to the store instead.
Mhm.
That's a true cost of doing business, right? Like, oh, I've got
Yeah,
to go to the
it
grocery
really
store.
is.
Then if you can spend $15, I think Instacart is $100 a year, if I'm not mistaken. And then like a fee on top of whatever your groceries are. Is
Yeah.
that worth it to be able to bill $250 times
Yeah, it's like
hour
maybe
a week?
20
That's 52
20 to
hours.
25 $20 to have your groceries delivered.
Yeah. So,
I just saved an hour
correct.
for $20.
Yeah. When I was living in the city, I did rinse. They picked up my laundry, washed it, folded it, and brought it back to me. It was like a miracle. I loved it.
Yeah.
Favorite thing ever. It was such a, like, again, because I was living in a flat, we had a washer and dryer in the building, but not in the unit. And so I'd have to go downstairs. And then depending on if someone else had laundry in there, I had to wait. Um,
Yeah.
and so then laundry became this like behemoth where I would try to do it at like these weird hours. And then also, and like oftentimes weird hours were during the day because my neighbors were not home. They didn't work from home. And so,
Mhm.
and I'm cutting into time that I would normally be working. So
Yeah.
it's just funny. Like these things are part of the true cost of doing business. And I think we don't
Yeah.
talk about them enough, and we certainly don't talk about them enough.
There was this millionaire who had calculated that if he makes his smoothie in the morning, it like cost him exponentially as a yearly cost, because that's what it is. If I'm going to make a smoothie every day for a whole year, and I think he calculated some big number, I can't remember what it was now, but he was making millions, so his hourly rate was considerably higher. But he just said no, and a lot of people who are probably upwards of $500,000 a year, and so they'll have chefs or just people come in to do things because you can see very easily. And like you were saying with the laundry example, I have a little bit of a, like, I really like things to be neat and tidy all the time. So if I'm doing my laundry during the day and when it's hot out of the dryer, I mean, I like folding laundry, but
Over.
like I shouldn't do that during the middle of my day. But it's tempting for me. Being at home is tempting for me to, yeah, I'll come over. Because I like putting the dishes away and stuff like that. And so I try. It sounds funny, but I try to not do that during the middle of the day because it really takes, unless I need like to chill out, or sometimes you just need a break and you want to have change the scenery. I get all that, but you can just start to see how truly expensive it is to get caught up in. Oh, I think aside from the fact that I enjoy it, I think people think, oh, well, I have to do this. Especially being a mom and having kids, I have to fold the laundry. Like I know a lot of women who feel that way, not because they enjoy it. And I think there's that's a big cost. And I'm not saying leave your laundry, you have to have a solution for it, but you can see how these things really take away from what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, it's true. So I think knowing your numbers and like knowing what it costs you to go to the grocery store,
Yeah.
having those delivered, what it costs you to do the laundry versus having it delivered. Maybe it's,
Yeah.
I know for a lot of women, and this was especially true during the pandemic, that the cost of childcare, well, during the pandemic, there was no childcare, right? So you had to bring the kids home, and then you had to become the teacher or at least the teaching assistant if they were on Zoom. But there were a lot of women that never went back to work because the cost of daycare was the same as working. Like their salary just covered the daycare. And so then, well, did I become a mom? What, right? To have somebody else raise my kid? Like if I could be making this much bigger number, totally makes sense. But if it's just like breaking even, or sometimes it's actually more than what you're able to make, suddenly that doesn't make sense. And so,
Yeah.
really looking at those costs and understanding what you're working for, and then how much it makes sense for you to work. That's how you calculate your hourly rate, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
not, oh, I don't have a lot of experience. Well, you must have some, right? There's got to be some experience going into this. And again, we talked about this in a previous episode. When you are first starting out, you might not know how to budget your hours. You may not know how many hours you should be working. You'll probably work more than the estimated design fee. And so you might, your first couple years, work at a rate of like $50 to $75 an hour. And that's totally fine. But as long as that's covering your costs, like at some point you have to be able to shrink your time and increase your wages. And so
Yeah.
if you're constantly working more in order to make ends meet, there's something wrong in your billing structure. There's something wrong in your hourly rate, or your flat fee, or what you're spending, right? Like there has to be a way of tracking all of these different things so that you really know. And again, like this is hard. It's not, the math isn't hard. It's super easy math, but it is hard to wrap your head around sometimes when we didn't go to business school. We went to art school, and we're trained to think creatively. And I don't think the IRS as much appreciates it when we're creative about money. Right? I'm gonna leave that to my accountant who knows the tax law better than I do. They can be creative with the money, but I can't be creative with money. I mean, I can because I know now like what kinds of things. This is another piece of this, like your true cost of doing business could be complemented by having a really great tax professional who understands how to save you money and is going to give you tips and tricks on how to accomplish that. But if you don't have a budget in place and you're not aware of all of these other pieces, all the tips and tricks aren't going to help because
And I think it's even more important to know your numbers, because I think as designers, like obviously one of the parts of our main part of our job is to spend money
yeah,
and to spend money on really nice things. So we've gotten really good at picking stuff out. We've gotten really good at shopping. And so it's also easy to sort of avoid wanting to think of like a budget, because there's this like big tendency to spend money is a big part of what we do. And so I think just flipping it around, and I always say, remind yourself that you're a business person first and you're a designer second. And if you do it the other way around, I hate to say it, but it's going to be an expensive hobby versus a thriving business. But it is about knowing your numbers, because if you don't have that really clear, like if I'm going to go buy a new computer, I mean, it's great if you just go and pay for it, but also you could just put in your budget like $200 a month to cover that. And so those are the numbers that you want to know, because if you don't put it all together, like Andy just did the math and it was less than half of what was left over. That's kind of a big shock. Like, oh, okay. I really am very motivated to make some changes here.
well, we a long time ago had we took a finance class, and she said, if you own a home or a car, it's not if the car breaks down, it's not if
Mhm.
it needs a repair, it's when.
Yeah.
And so you don't need to be surprised that you need a computer at some point, right? You don't need to be surprised that your printer
Guaranteed.
stops working.
Yeah.
But if you're not setting money aside and your budget's already tight, then it's going to feel like not a surprise as much as like what doesn't get paid for this month in lieu of this other thing, right?
Yep.
Because I know I can't live without my computer. I have drafting software. I've got Photoshop. I do a lot of my own, design presentations, and I couldn't function without a computer. It would not be
Yeah.
possible for me to run my
Yeah.
business.
I mean, I don't think anybody can.
And probably not today. It would be,
Unless you're in like a really extreme situation, but for the most
I mean,
part, it's a
okay.
basic necessity of the job.
Yeah, and maybe for you it's an iPad or it's some kind of tablet, but my point is that you have an electronic device that
Yeah.
separate from your phone. And again, like if my phone wasn't working, which it was doing this weird thing for a while, and I was so frustrated, was deleting many people's text messages. And so I got a new phone, and then that still was happening. And I was like, great, I just spent like unneeded money on a new device because they thought that would fix the problem, and that wasn't it. And so anyway, it got fixed eventually, but that we have expenses, right? They're not,
Yeah.
and so
They're
none of,
not, it's not a mystery.
no, it's not. It's not a mystery, but we don't want to be in the business of losing money, right? Like that's today's
Yeah.
topic. We want to make sure that we are profiting. And so understanding where your profit is coming from after your expenses is the really important piece. And I think, we did touch on this, but that markup is the second stream of income, and that could make or break you. But if you're not getting furnishings projects that are bringing in the
Mhm.
markup, or you're not purchasing the plumbing or tile for the construction, which a lot of designers don't do, they leave that up to the contractor, and that's fine. But that is a stream of revenue that you are missing. And so then
Mhm.
you have to recalculate that into your hourly fee because you're not getting it from some
Yeah.
place. And I
Yep.
think
Exactly.
that's the learning. Like there are a million ways of charging. And so I do a flat fee plus markup. I know a lot of people do hourly plus markup. Some people do only hourly, no markup, but that
Is
their
accounted for.
fee
The
is
markup's
so
accounted
high,
for in the
it's
fee.
included, because you can always figure out what the markup should be on a budget. You just take 25 or 30% or 35, depending on what your markup is, multiply that by the net cost, and right away you know what the markup should be, and then you just put that over into your fee, rebalance everything, and then that becomes the new hourly or the new flat fee.
Yep.
So there's no one way is better than another of charging. I think there are like so many, those are 3 models that I know of. I'm sure there's others that I'm not even thinking about. And some people have like a moderately high hourly and a minimal markup, and like that markup covers issues when things come in. It covers like bookkeeping fees and other things. And so I mean, I think that there is something that's quite attractive. We did touch on this, I think, last episode, where we in our at the Scolo firm, we had a client that came in. They were lawyers, they were used to hourly billing, they did not want to pay a markup. And for them, the advantage of that was that they also didn't pay extra in taxes, right? Like they're paying
Mhm.
taxes on the net amount versus the marked up amount. So they're saving 30% in taxes and 30% on that item. But basically our fees, I think, went from whatever to double. And
Yeah.
in the end, that model proved to be one of our more profitable projects because we build them
Yep.
for everything.
Yep.
And I mean, down to like the pieces of paper that we printed. And so there's not going to be one way that's better than another. And you might choose, if you have a client that asks to deviate from your current model and try something different and see if that's where you want to end up shifting your business practice. But when there's a shift, you still have to get paid somehow, right? This isn't a nonprofit, it's a for-profit, and the profit goes to you. And so
Mhm.
when you stop thinking that way and you're like, sure, I can give you net cost and then take this low hourly, you're shooting yourself in the foot. And I did that years ago. I had a project that ran that way. And when I looked back, I should have made, oh, this is painful to say, and it's a good reminder for everyone, including myself.
That's how you got to where you are, is you do have to learn the hard
Yeah.
way. And
But I
we're
looked
trying to
back.
help you to have a shortcut on the hard way.
Yep. But I looked back and I had left $80,000 on the table, because I didn't realize I should have renegotiated that. That model came from the client, and it was my first really big job.
Yeah.
And I did it, I think, against my better judgment. I was probably acting out of fear. There was a lot going
Yeah.
on. And so I just said yes without really like calculating again what was the true cost of that business deal. And it turned out it was about 80 grand. And so
Yeah.
that is how I, like we've both, right? It's not just me. And I think
Yeah, you'll never forget
gonna-
that. And that's allowed you to get where you are. I
Yeah.
mean, as much as it is painful,
Yep.
those type of experiences not only build character, but they do allow you to change. Like we were talking earlier, if you don't do something different, how do you expect anything to change? And so we're trying to share these examples with you to really create a sense of motivation.
And I mean, I think the thing about change that might be the most difficult in this situation, like if this is a pain point for you, super easy, right? You're going to go out and be like, I'm going to do this and this and this, get it going, make some changes because you want to see more profit, less losses. Your life would change because of having more money. It would probably make things a little bit easier. And again, money doesn't create happiness, it creates freedom, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully it's also creating more time for you. That was the other piece that we really want to bring in, is that the time component is the one thing you can never recover. It is your most important commodity. So figuring out how you can create more time generally is making more money. But if you're already making enough, right? Is there a motivation to change? Do you want to make more? Have you thought about making more? Because you don't like, I think most of us might start out feeling like, well, there's an abundance. I feel pretty good. But if you haven't gone through the process of actually looking at your profit center, and your losses, you might not fully understand what it is you're making, and you might be missing. And so, we want not just to alleviate a pain point, but there's also, how can you become even more abundant? And you can, right? I think it's just, this is a form of self-care that I think isn't really talked about enough. We talk about bubble baths and saunas, going for walks and exercise, and all those things are part of my self-care practices. I love them. But I think the one thing that changed the most for me was when I really started to pay attention to my money.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you want to feel like year in and year out. I mean, I think what motivated me is, do I want to be in the same place this time next year and the year after that? And if you want things to be different, and that's why, well, I guess one of the other things that we need to talk about is creating a yearly goal.
Yes.
Once I started doing that, that really gave me a lot more clarity than just, oh, I have to make this amount to get by every month. Once I shifted into like, well, but the whole year in total, that actually was a big pivot point for me personally, of saying, well, wait a second, I have enough time. I should be able to increase this amount. And that allowed me, I would say, to maybe triple what I wanted, because I started looking at it as a yearly goal. I mean, a lot of people talk about goals and stuff like that, but I think, well, Grant Cardone says, 10x your goals, like whatever you say you want, multiply it times 10, because you're going to get what you want, and you're going to go, oh man, I should have gone bigger. So, that's a good piece of advice. But even if you just, triple your goals. But for me, looking at the yearly thing really helped me out a lot, like going through a whole year, because then it allows you to say, well, I'm going to say yes to these projects, no to these projects. Da, 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 da. This is what my year needs to look like. And for me, I was tripling it. That was my factor of 3 for some reason.
I mean, I think that, so I truly think that the universe provides us with what we expect and feel aligned to. And so, I mean, and I can tell you this is true for me because I literally watched it happen in my own life. Like, I had this period where this was like in maybe 2015, where I had I'd done my budget
Uh-huh.
and I budgeted, and I literally was like, okay, I just need to make this amount of money every month and I'll be okay.
Uh-huh.
And the okay was literally like down to zero in my bank account on a frequent basis. And but I was paying all my bills and like everything was covered. And so in my mind that, and I mean, again, like living in San Francisco, single woman, I had never made this much money before. And and it's expensive. And so I remember I don't know if you were at that meeting, but Barbara brought in one time a financial advisor who literally told our entire office, you can have a 401k or you can buy a house, but not both. And I was like,
nice. That's great advice.
But that was like the amount of money that you needed to save for retirement was either a mortgage or your retirement. And then if you had a mortgage, that became your retirement, right? Like, you pay off that house and then you get the equity out, or you sell it and move someplace much less expensive.
Yeah.
And so, and I would bet, knowing what I know now, that real estate was always the better investment, actually.
Yeah.
401k. Here, I wouldn't say that everywhere in the country, but in this area for sure, real estate will appreciate much, much faster. So
I think real estate almost anywhere is a good idea.
Yes, but I mean, in some areas you'd be able to do both the 401k and the real estate, right? Just not here. And so like going to zero or almost zero every month and like knowing that I was going to be paid again, or that I had money set aside to pay myself, if I made it these like little amounts was my standard. But it didn't, like, there was nothing left over. There just wasn't like an abundance or any like comfort. And so
no growth, no profit.
Right. Very little to reinvest in my business. I was just paying myself. And I would wager quite a few people are in that same position because no one tells us how to do this. And so most businesses have operating expenses. Having something set aside for that is going to then allow you to, again, pay for that computer, the printer, the bookkeeper, whatever. But if you aren't making enough, then you're wearing all the hats like we talked about in episode 3, I think. You're putting on more and more hats, and then most of those hats aren't billable. So you're saving money, but then you're not actually having time to put into the projects that are the profit center. So it's like this weird,
you run the risk of not growing, but also you run the risk of like burning out too if you do that, because maybe you're doing stuff that you don't enjoy. So are you going to be still able to pull those things off in 5 years, or is it going to be a drain on your energy?
Yeah. I mean, I
that's
think
a huge cost.
Huge.
And you should have growth because, well, you're going to want to travel and have a better and better life. And that affects, especially for designers, travel is a big thing for inspiration.
Yeah. And I think just
for
the
world,
personal growth, like encountering other cultures and other experiences, understanding other ways of living is very inspiring. And edifying just for your own self But I think that the piece of this is really get a money mindset.
Yes,
Right?
it's
This is
so
it.
true. Yeah,
Get
because
a money
why
mindset.
would you just want to grind and just have it equal zero? Bills are paid. Like, I mean, that's not really any way to live. And having your own business, you do have the flexibility, unlike an employee is kind of locked in. An employee is a little more locked in. I mean, technically they're not. They could still have a side business if they wanted to.
Sure.
But most employees don't think like that. Um,
Well, and I
but
think
the point of
also-
this is that you can grow. You should have a growth mindset, which is a money mindset as well.
and I think I believe we said this in another episode too, but if you leave a job that's
Yeah.
paying you a salary and move into the business of design and having your own business, don't take the employee mindset with you, right? You need to have a business mindset. And part of that is having this money mindset. And I think it really does take quite a few years to develop this if you haven't thought about it and you're just like,
Yeah.
I mean, this is such a common way of finding yourself in a design business. Like, wasn't even intentional. There are many people, right? So we talked about this earlier, that maybe you had your own project and then you had friends that came and were like, this is amazing. Can you do my project? Suddenly you're
Yeah.
a designer, right?
Yeah.
Or I know a few people that this has happened to where they were working in a firm with a client and they intended to leave anyway, and the
Uh-huh.
client came with them. Like they were looking to
Yeah.
on. And I
I've had that
can't
happen.
honestly say if there was like a I'm going out to start my own business, or even if it was just sort of but they created a connection with the client. The client was like,
Yeah.
it's you, not the firm, right? Sometimes that happens, and it's not that the firm isn't great. It's just that we also have our own set of things that people enjoy about us. And maybe it's
Yeah.
just the relationship already and they don't want to form a new one. Maybe it's
Mhm.
that they really feel seen and heard by this particular designer. And so you are the one that they're like, betting my money on you doing this.
Yep.
And so however you get your first client, whether it's intentional or not, and oftentimes it isn't, that
Mhm.
you might, or frequently, maybe this is more the case, like it is intentional that you get a client, but maybe the second and third clients weren't like right on your radar. And instead of being out on the horizon, they're like right at your front door. And so,
Yeah.
and then you don't have time to build any practices and structures.
Yep.
And so then thinking about how do we do this? Am I charging enough? Like, are you even thinking about that? Probably not. You're like, what? I was charging this at my old firm. Well, now you're the principal. So maybe you should be charging what the principal, or somewhere in between what the principal was making and what you are making. So there's that employee mindset that a lot of people leave with. Or if they
Yeah.
weren't a designer previously, they might not even know what to charge, or they may have
Yeah.
paid a designer, and had an idea that so there's all kinds of different things, but our point is that you could charge $2,000 an hour, and if you only have 1 hour a week of work, it's not
Yeah.
enough, right? And so really truly figuring out what your budget is, really truly figuring out what your expenses are, both personally and professionally, and then setting your rates based on that is how you will profit.
And there's also certain behavioral things that you want to do as you're working on the project itself. Like one thing that we were talking about earlier is like, don't over design. So if you're working all like other ways of budgeting, this is almost like a way of budgeting. If I'm working on a project, I need to make sure that I don't over design. Well, what is that? Because the design could just you could redesign something 100 different times, but you do need to have a set number of times that you're going to design and offer solutions, and have a hard line. If the client wants more, that's part of the contract where you say, well, that's hourly services kick in, or whatever you call it.
Or it's just
defining,
beyond the estimated fee, right? Like you might
it's
be
beyond the
hourly
estimated.
already.
Yep. And you're defining the scope, and you're also defining the amount of time, which we've talked a lot about this, but you just can sort of see that there's also a behavior within the project that you need to bring on as a business person and as a team too, like you and whoever else is, part of the team. Like you need to instill that into
Yep.
you guys as a team of designers, like, well, this is what we're going to do, but it's only this many presentations and this many revisions and only 2 options and 1 revision. And like a really set, oh, we've already met with them 5 times, like we need their approvals and things like that. And if a lot of times clients need more, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you've already outlined that in advance in your scope and your contract. But there's those behavioral things that will also affect your numbers too. Those
Absolutely.
are hours in the day.
Yep. Yep. Well, and again, this goes right back into our discussion from last week, boundaries. So you can call them
Yeah.
parameters, you can call them boundaries, you can call them
Right.
structures, whatever. They all lead back to a line in the sand. So when we are talking about using a forecasting document for a project, we're looking at how many people are on the project. If it's not just you, there are going to be some other people who also have hours. If you've given somebody a project rate, like all the time that other people are spending has to be included in that rate. So
Yeah.
that's really encouraged not to give any estimates during that initial meeting, but that it is designed as a process, and creating a scope of work and a fee is also a process. And when we throw out a number for somebody, and it's not tied to anything, it's quite dangerous, because you could be promising something that is many more hours than what you have expected because you didn't really understand. And I think the thing about clients is their memories are very sharp when you start talking money, and very dull when you start talking about the boundaries and other things that are coming into play. And
Well,
so,
and then that affects their behavior. Like if I'm the client and you're telling me, well, I need to maybe pick something that you're showing me within this number of choices, or else it's going to cost me more. Like I'm going to be motivated by that, right? I'm going to be like, oh, well, that's going to be one consideration. And I might also need more options. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but it'll allow them to have the freedom of how they want to behave. Because, a lot of people, they just want it to be done. Like they just want it to be done. And so if there's boundaries for how they can behave that will help them get it done, they'll probably actually appreciate that quite a bit.
I mean, again, this is a new practice for me, but the flat fee and outlining the scope of work, the fee and moving forward, there's been like 0 conflicts with clients because they know what to expect and I'm delivering what I said I would. And so the moments where I've gotten into trouble is if I've deviated from that in some way and haven't updated the client and reset the expectations or had a conversation. I think that's when there is an upset or a frustration, because nobody likes an unexpected bill. And again, like they're paying,
It's so true.
They know to expect a bill, but if it's out of what you had already talked about or previously discussed, then I mean, that's a surprise. And so
that's not a good way to go.
And so that's another level of self-care. And it's like business care, self-care, like you're protecting your nervous system, you're protecting your business, make sure that you're getting paid.
It's in the same boat as self-care.
Yep. And so
what about the actual practice of creating a yearly goal for the amount of projects that you want to take on based on the amount that you want to create income, bring in income and profit? And really starting that practice, I think, is really important. And it's something that took me a long time before I started actually doing. And now I'm a convert to it. But I think with single practitioners or smaller businesses, you're so fixated on, well, I'm going to take this new project that's right here in front of me.
Yeah.
And so to me, thinking about the whole year, I wasn't in the habit of thinking like that. And that was a big pivot for me. And it allowed me to triple what I was doing.
Yeah, I mean, I used to play this game because I have both the artwork and the design business.
Mhm.
And again, it was like, how do I cobble together this number that I want to make every month? And so I could sell 3 paintings and then have 2 projects, right?
Mhm.
I could have 3 projects and sell 1 painting. And like all the projects are different sizes and all these different things. And I mean, I
Yeah.
think that part of the business that we have, if you're an artist or not, is you have to be looking at the size of the project and the start date, because you want to be filling in your
Yeah.
pipeline, right? And so if you've got 2 already really big projects, maybe taking on 1 small project isn't the end of the world, but
Is
you
maybe a
have
good
to
idea
figure, yeah,
sometimes.
you have to figure out what that small project is and what it
Yeah.
would be um covering,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
ultimately, like, if you have that, let's say you want to make $200,000 a year in
Mhm.
profit, right? That means that you probably have to, your revenue has to be close to 400. So a good rule of thumb is that whatever you want to bring in,
Double it.
double it. And
Yeah.
that's your goal. Um, and then I do think that gives you some idea of, okay, so if I have to make 400K in a year in order to bring in 200K in profit, um, what do those projects look like? I think
Yeah.
dreaming big is amazing because one project could net you $200,000 in that year.
Yeah.
And most likely, if it's a big project like that, it's probably going to be more like an 18-month project. So around month 14, you're going to want to start filling your pipeline as this winds down, because you're not going to be billing
Yeah.
things, right? So like
Right.
if it's an 18-month project around month 14, like your billing is going to slow down and there's not going to be as much to do.
Mhm.
Except maybe in month 18 when you're like installing everything and like managing a whole bunch of stuff. Like sure,
Yeah. No, your time winds down as the
right,
project goes down.
until the installation, and then it has like a burst, which is generally a big bill, and then it drops off sharply.
I
So you
just had a
have to look at
client freak
those.
out about that because he's like, "Well, I still have, I don't know, let's call it roughly 6 months left
Huh?
on the project, but most of the design has been billed," and he didn't understand. He's like, "How come I've already spent like the majority, or I don't know, 70% of the total amount?" I'm like, "Well, because my stuff, I've done the hard part.
I'm not
I'm
designing
down
while
here
they're still
now."
building.
That just like he couldn't compute. It was hard for him to understand.
Yeah. I think
But that is the reality. I mean, if I have to answer questions on the contractor side for an hour or two a week, I
mhm,
mean, that's nothing compared to when I had to spend 20 hours a week preparing for the presentations.
yeah, absolutely. So again, like understanding when your projects are supposed to start dropping off, and like when
Right.
these are really important factors, because you want to be able to have another project in the wings waiting to come online, uh,
Yeah.
so that you can maintain your billables, uh,
Right.
and maintain your standard of living.
Right.
Having your own business is risky. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. And I think this business, as we all know how I feel about how risky it is, there's a lot of things to understand and manage. But
But I think a lot of these tips and tricks are about how to keep it simple and how to stay focused. Like, you know, the don't over design thing, I think, is such a good piece of advice because that is obviously why we're here, is because we're designers.
yeah,
But again, you need to be a business person first.
yeah,
And a business person will say, "Great, the design's beautiful, but like you can only do two, or it needs to be in like a lot of times when I'm working with junior staff, I'll tell them, we need to find X, Y, and Z pieces of furniture, and this should only spend an hour, or sorry, only spend 2 hours. But I always give them a time set amount, And that way also, if they have a problem, they'll know like, oh, well, I needed more. Okay, well, what was the problem? So let's make sure you're trained properly. And so there's always this way of managing time. And I think of that as a business person doing that. Cause I know when you're a designer and you're in design school, you just redesign and you have your class presentations, and
Yeah.
they don't really teach you that part of the business, I feel like, in school.
Yeah. How to manage.
And so
I mean, to that end, and I think we're coming to a close, but the piece about like if you're thinking like a designer, you're going to spend an unlimited amount of time, and maybe you realize then you can't bill all that time to the client. If you're a business person, like let's say I only have one
yeah,
project, I'm only going to spend the amount of hours that I've allocated to that project, because I also know I have to go out and get new business, and some of my time needs to be spent there. So you are not just a designer, which I operated that way for years and years, just a designer. I'm just a designer.
yeah,
But the reality is that I have other parts of my business that need to be managed and have time allocated. And so I can't be just a designer. And that I think is the mindset shift that is super important.
yes,
And will, again, like we want you to have more time, more money, more freedom. If
yeah,
you're a slave to the design, you're not ever going to have more time. You might have
yep.
more money, but you're not going to have more freedom.
And it's kind of like that simple old piece of advice, like keep it simple, because this stuff isn't that complicated, right? I mean, there are certain things that are complex, but like these are straightforward pieces of advice that if you, and really, I think the biggest thing is to actually put them into practice.
Yeah.
That's what's going to make the biggest difference. Like we were talking earlier, you know, if you understand change, but you don't, like, when are you actually going to say, oh, now's the time to change? And that's what we're trying to encourage you. Let's do it today.
Today, change today. Look at your numbers. Look at your numbers.
Why not? Why not today?
And reach out on Instagram and let us know, like, what's your percentage of profit? You're aiming for 10 to 15% profitability. Anything under that, you're going to be struggling. And anything more than that, congratulations.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let us know what you end up finding out. And as
We'd
always,
love to hear from you. Direct message us on Instagram.
and reach out on the website if you would like any kind of weekly or monthly coaching. And we also have an application for personal coaching up. So we look forward to meeting you, seeing you online, and listening along. I hope that you feel like you're in the room with us. I just had Alina, I met Alina recently at a retreat, and she said, it's like I'm in the room with you girls. I love it. So I loved hearing that feedback. And Alina, if you're listening, thank you again. All right, we're going to say goodbye, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thanks for listening and being part of our community. Speaking of community, please head over to our website and sign up for podcast alerts and blog posts. And if you're looking for more resources to up-level your business, create more time in your schedule, and improve your profits, we have a blueprint for your success that covers mindset, systems, business, teams, and tools. Think of us as your unaccredited university. Visit us at under-the-fringe.com and tune in next week for our next deep dive on creating more freedom and less struggle.